Asia Economic Dialogue, where the brightest minds and the oldest or the boldest ideas converge to shape the future of India, Asia, and as a result, our global economy. Our afternoon yesterday was quite illuminating after excellent openings by Ambassador Bambavale, Dr. Mashelka, and Minister Jaishankar.
Recording in progress.
We had our first session, ably led by Ambassador Gautam Bambavale, on the integration of South Asia, where we learnt in South Asia, despite it seemingly being one of the least integrated regions, with intra-regional trade at only 5% and intra-regional investment at 1%, significant progress continues to be made towards fostering connectivity and cooperation. Initiatives like the Neighbourhood First policies have led to advances in various connectivity domains, including physical infrastructure like power grids, emerging areas like power trade, and fintech interoperability, and market linkage through e-commerce. Yesterday's conversation on women and geoeconomics highlighted areas for action, including empowering women in certain sectors, addressing gender disparities, and combating gender-based violence with greater openness and dialogue. Well, if yesterday gave us a macro picture, then today is going to give us micro-level insights, diving deep into the intricacies of innovation, technology, diplomacy, and economic corridors shaping the future landscape of global innovation and connectivity. This morning promises to ignite your imagination and stimulate your intellect. Let's talk a little bit about generative AI. So in the corridors of innovation, a new muse beckons, the enigmatic generative AI. For months, it's danced on the lips of technologists, economists, and dreamers alike. But what lies beneath this buzz? What promises does it whisper, and what shadows does it cast? Generative AI is not your run-of-the-mill algorithm. It doesn't merely analyze and classify existing data. It births something incredibly and entirely novel. Imagine a canvas where pixels morph into art, where words weave symphonies, and where synthetic data births insights. From ChatGPT to DALL-E, this technology transcends boundaries. So will it be the Prometheus gifting us or gifting fire to humanity, or will it be Pandora unleashing chaos? Join our panel who will be debating, will it augment or our labor, or render us obsolete? Will it simplify our existence or complicate our choices? Will it catalyze innovation or disrupt established norms? And will it harmonize global relations or ignite digital wars? Well, leading our discussions is Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, Executive Chairman and founder of 5F World, whose visionary leadership and entrepreneurial spirit have left a mark on India's digital ecosystem. As co-founder of multiple impactful ventures and a key figure in organizations like NASSCOM, he's been instrumental in shaping India's technology landscape. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, can I welcome you onto the stage? Can we give him a big round of applause? And let's welcome his panelists onto the stage as well. So as I call your names out, if I could invite you to be up here. First of all, Rajesh Nambiar, Executive Vice President, Chairman and MD of Cognizant India. Can I invite you up? Please give him a big round of applause. As Prashant Girbane says, your claps are free and extremely important. So Rajesh leads a workforce of 250,000 associates with extensive experience in leadership roles at Sienna, India, IBM, and TCS. He's recognized for his expertise in technology and business, holding a master's degree in statistics and graduating from Harvard Business School's Advanced Management Program. We also have Nitin Chugh, Deputy MD and Head of Digital Banking and Transformation at the State Bank of India. Welcome, Nitin. He brings 29 years of transformative banking experience, notably recognized as one of India's top CEOs during the COVID crisis. Chugh is a leader who, in the banking landscape, setting benchmarks for digital innovation. We also have Dr. Rohini Srivathsa, Chief Technology Officer, Microsoft India and South Asia. Rohini, welcome. She leads transformative digital initiatives across sectors, leveraging AI and emerging technologies, with a distinguished career spanning research and development and strategic consulting at top firms like BCG and IBM. She shapes the future of technology and its societal impact. And then online, we have joining us Jeff Walters, MD and Senior Partner from the Boston Consulting Group. Can we give him a round of applause? He's part of Greater China and is a leader in consumer strategy and operations, with deep expertise across sectors, including consumer goods, retail, and e-commerce. He shapes the trajectory of consumer businesses in the region through strategic insights and contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, the buzz echoes, but the symphony is ours to compose. Ganesh, please compose.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I certainly can't match Vandana's eloquence early in the morning. So let me start by maybe telling you a story. But first of all, a small correction. We actually have not 3, not 4, but 5 people on this panel. There's, of course, Rajesh, there's Jeff, Rohini, and Nitin. But late last night, Nitin, without telling me, invited a 5th participant. And that's ChatGPT. You all know ChatGPT, guys? Yes, hopefully. So Nitin said, let's get ChatGPT into the conversation. And ChatGPT, being a very talkative person, actually got a lot of inputs into our panel, and I'll talk about it as we go along. But let me first start with a story. Imagine you're at the Asia Economic Dialogue in the fantastic new PIC campus that's coming up not far from here. Maybe in 2025, let's pick a date, maybe next year, maybe year after. And in every conference, may not be you, but certainly me, I'm getting too old, you meet various people whom you know, but you can't place. So you kind of weave around and say, how are you doing nowadays? Where have we met before? And all that good stuff. And then the guy will say, look, I met you only yesterday. But that's a different story. Okay. But next year, when you come here, you'll be wearing a Google pin. Not a Google pin, sorry. I mean, an AI pin. An AI pin is just getting introduced into the market. If you read the papers, you would have figured they're talking to all the big telecom majors. And what that AI pin will do for you is, all you have to do is whisper into your AI pin saying, who's this person? And before you know it, your ears will be buzzing by, this is the person, this is how you met him, etc., etc. And that's how it goes on. So it can also predict and tell you that, look, whether you should spend more time with this person, is it going to be fruitful, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, what Google tried to do with Google Glass many years ago, you wear a glass and that kind of you get the immediate recognition. I think things like that are beginning to happen. So what we're going to do in the next 70 minutes is really demystify some of these ideas, because I realize in every AI discussion, and Rajesh and I just finished a 2-day discussion on AI at NASSCOM last week, there are people who are very advanced in terms of their understanding. At the same time, there are people who are still kind of figuring out what can do. So I thought, let me first start by kind of looking at what people are predicting at trends that will happen because of artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence. What is this $330 billion new industry that people are talking about? So I said, no place to go better than look at the MIT Technology Review. And MIT Technology Review, as some of you may be knowing, it comes out every year in January. And they kind of honestly say, what did we predict last year and where did we get it right or wrong? And they also make predictions for this year. Now, last year, if you remember, if any of you read it, on AI, they had predicted that there will be many multimodal chatbots, which means that you can interact through video, voice, whatever. There would be a whole bunch of new startups that will come in that will challenge the incumbent. And they said, of course, that governments will suddenly wake up and say and jump to regulate. If you think back on 2023, you will figure that all this happened. I mean, multimodal chatbots are everywhere. If you look at startups, of course, OpenAI and what we've all heard about, Sam Altman and all the controversy and the big hype around it. And of course, every country, including our own country, India, and of course the US and China and UK, have started talking about regulation. So what are the predictions for this year? I'll kind of start with that and then get views from our panelists first. So first of all, multitasking robots. So you're not far away when all your activity is done by robots, and that could be robots sitting on your computer. Multitasking physical robots who will drive your car, clean your room, make your lunch, everything. And that's the physical part of it. And then they talk about the text to video frontier. In fact, Vandana alluded to a few of those when she talked about actually animating and making stuff happen. Started very early last year, becoming a completely mainstream at this point of time. Just to give you an example, there's a company called Runway AI, which is now running a regular AI film festival where people can actually make movies, will eventually compete with the Oscars. And in fact, there is even a small thing that they produced, which is again by AI. And this is a movie, the 2023 version of Indiana Jones, which is actually has a de-aged and a de-human Harrison Ford. So imagine things like this will happen and you will almost be able to not differentiate the reality from what is a fake. Talking about fake videos, one big prediction they're making is with the 40 elections that are coming up in the world, many of them will use AI very effectively, and in some cases you'll get fooled as well. I mean, examples abound. I mean, if you look at what's happened in Argentina, what's happened in Slovakia, what happened to our neighbor, Pakistan. I mean, if any of you watch the television, you had multiple AI videos of Imran Khan from jail actually trying to appeal to his voter base. So that's clearly something that's going to happen. Good or bad, we can discuss as we go along. And finally, you will find a lot of these large learning models, LLMs as we call them, with customized chatbots. So you will have Microsoft Copilot, which is all the rage nowadays, and I'm sure Rohini will talk about that. We'll have other entities like ChatGPT, which we talked about, Gemini, or Gemini as the Americans would call it, which got into a lot of controversy recently by making some outrageous statements about politicians. And of course, as I mentioned, Runway AI and a whole bunch of stuff. So what we are seeing is on one hand a very confusing landscape because there's so much of hype, so much of investment happening in AI. And if you take Gen AI, which today is almost the 33% of the AI discussion, that's going to be even more compelling. At the same time, naturally, there are what we call the doomers who are saying that, look, AI will destroy the planet and we will have a completely different set of problems to deal with. But people like us who are optimists, or as Dr. Mashelkur would like to say, dangerous optimists, truly believe that society, companies, and individuals can get transformed through AI. So with that slightly longish introduction, let me throw it open. I'll tell you how we'll structure the session. We'll get maybe 5 to 7 minute comments from each of our panelists. I'll start with Rajesh, move to Jeff, who's based out of Hong Kong and is kind of dialing in from there. Then talk to Nitin, who is going to talk about a practitioner's experience, and then move to Rohini. And then I'm going to come straight to the audience. So any questions that you have, we'll take the questions, and then we'll keep the ball rolling till 11:15 when we stop. So that's really the longer agenda. So let me first start with Rajesh. Rajesh, as you know, is chairman of NASSCOM. And as I mentioned earlier, we actually did a full 2-day convening with all the global experts on the AI topic. So Rajesh, from your vantage point of view, both running one of the very large entities in technology in this country, as well as, of course, NASSCOM, where do you see AI, what's it doing, and where's it going?
Thank you, Ganesh, for the kind introduction. And of course, thank you for having me here in the panel. Always great to be here in Pune. So, no, I think you covered quite some ground today. And I just want to sort of pick up from where you left. And we know, you talked about the impact broadly. And when you go back and look at history, you will see that technology discontinuity has always had a major impact on human capital, which means anytime you have a major discontinuity in technology, which is, for example, the invention of microprocessor, and there are several things which happened thereafter. So I think what we're going to be witnessing is something similar with AI. But interestingly, AI is not new, and people think that it is new, but it is far from new. 1955 is when this word was first coined. 70 years down the line, we are still talking about AI. It's because of the fact that since then, AI always had a sort of a jagged progress, if you may. There was maybe a period of fast progress, and then nothing happens for the next 10 years, and then again some spurts and so on and so forth. So finally, what really got the attention of everybody, and then the reason why we're having this conference with a lot of AI discussion is probably because of the generative AI, as to be very precise, which happened about 18 months or so, maybe give or take a few months here and there. So that has actually made this discontinuum even more interesting for us to sort of look at it. Now, what is very different this time around compared to many of the other previous instances of where technology has created discontinuity? I believe this time around it's very different because of the fact that so far I could argue that humans were trying to understand computers. This is the first time around when computers are trying to understand human behavior, or computers are trying to understand or mimic human intelligence in many ways. So it's a very sort of a reverse process in that sense, and that's why I think the impact is going to be that much more in many ways, and that too in a very natural language interface. So it's no longer, you don't have to use a programming language, or you don't have to, by the way, let me just ask this audience, how many of you, what is the most popular programming language today? Any guesses? English. That's the right answer, because you don't need anything else to interface with computers any longer. Especially with the generative AI, the fact that the generative AI can produce a lot of, it can understand natural language interface, it can generate, obviously, whether it is text, audio, video, images, and so on and so forth. We've come a long way. That chasm was the biggest one to cross, and then I think we have kind of made the first, far from being perfect, by the way, far from being perfect. And Ganesh, you quoted some of the examples of Gemini and some of the others, whether even including, my friend Rohini is sitting next to me, but I can still say none of the generative AI is perfect at this point in time, but it's getting better as the day goes by. So that's number one. So as you know that, the fact that it generates so much of content, and plus that the impact it's beginning to make, there are lots of estimations. So Ganesh gave a number. I believe that the impact on the GDP overall over the next 5 or 10 years is going to be anywhere between 2.6 trillion to 4.5 trillion is what the estimated number. It could go up and down. Again, these estimates are completely based on lots of uncertainty. So, you can obviously take it with a grain of salt in some sense. But the impact is without a question very, very tangible as we move into the next phase of this whole generative AI, if you may, right? And interestingly, again, I think Ganesh mentioned about the impact, which has both lots of positive connotation, whether it is the productivity gain, the ability for us to automate things a lot better than we've ever done in the past, all of that. But there's also a lot of negative connotations associated with it, right? The biases that you see on the generative AI content that you see, right? Obviously it reflects a lot of biases which is existing in the ecosystem today, but it is nevertheless an issue to be grappled with. The complete false information, hallucination as they call it within the industry, the fact that you could create fake videos or deep fakes and so on and so forth. So there's a ton of issues to be dealt with, and we will not go, we can probably have a discussion around some of those, but these are not solved problems today. These are yet to be worked on. People are spending a lot of time, both from a regulation point of view, whether it's governments or the industry or the individuals, they're all grappling with these type of issues, which will sort of, over the period of time, might have an impact. Now, I want to argue again, saying that with all that we know and the impact that it could have, in the short run, I believe AI is a little bit overhyped, or generative AI is overhyped in the sense people will, Ganesh talked about a doomsday, declaration that, everything is going to shut down, nobody's going to have a job and so on and so forth. So that's one way of, and there are others who will say that it's going to completely have everybody become jobless in the next few days, or the productivity is going to be so high that our GDP is going to double in 1 year. You can find all kinds of predictions. I believe that in the short run, the reason is that not because of AI or generative AI is not capable of making that leap. I think at the end of the day, it is the human impact, human ability to leverage and then make a difference. Because AI by itself or generative AI by itself is not able to make that leap, the real impact happens when there's a human potential, human intervention in terms of making it happen in some sense, whether it is integrating with the existing systems or directing it to solve a specific problem, right? If that doesn't happen, right, we're not going to make much of a difference. And hence, I believe that in the short run, we're looking at a 2-year, 3-year time frame. I think we're overhyping the generative AI. At the same time, I want to say that in the long run, we are under-hyping or underestimating the impact that generative AI could have. So if you look at a 5 to 10-year horizon, I believe that the impact that the generative AI and AI in general, but by the way, generative AI is a very small part of AI. So if you look at AI in general, will have a much more impact than any of us could imagine at this point in time. So that's my argument. In the short run, it is overhyped, and in the long run, it's probably underhyped in some sense. So I'll talk about a couple of impacts I believe are very different from some of that stuff that you probably would have seen. First, I want to say that generative AI is a great equalizer. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And that's something which you probably might find it interesting. I think the benefits one could get with generative AI particularly is actually higher when your capabilities are lower, which means that, let's take a class of, a developer shop of about 100 people. People are already doing really well. They're at the, in a scale of 1 to 10, if they're at an 8 or a 9, of course they can leverage the AI tools, generative AI tools. They would probably get about a 10% or a 15% additional productivity. But if you are already on the lower end of the spectrum, you're not very productive, you're not very sharp guy, and then you're in a scale of 1 to 10, you're at a 2 or a 3 or a 4, you will get about 60 to 70% productivity gain compared to the one who is really doing well. So in that sense, it's a bit of an equalizer, if you may. So, and also remember, today, most of the previous tools which happened, especially in the technology world, where you can only leverage them if you really understand them, if you're really good at using them. But this will be the first time when this becomes easier. As long as you have access to some of these, in some sense, you could use it very easily because of the interface and because of the ease of using and so on and so forth, and hence is an equalizer. So that's something which we need to sort of grapple with. This is going to be an equalizer, right? So you can turn around and say, but what's the point of then being a bright guy? I don't know, right? That's something we need to understand how the impact is going to be there in a broad sense. And of course, generative AI is going to boost productivity because again, in the technology world, especially in the software world, people always had tools, right? The last 4 or 5 decades, we've always talked about tools which will make you much more productive. So the people talk about, we got to have 10x productivity, right? That's what people talked about 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Never happened, actually. Nobody was 10x productive. If you go back and look at the history. But today, the opportunity for somebody, not just 10x, to be 100x productivity is real. So which means that we went from an era where the productivity was actually marginally higher or lower to a situation where you could technically have a much higher level of productivity which will be driven by generative AI. So that's the second observation I want to make. It's also because we will move away from the world was always going from writing a lot of code to no code to low code to no code, but now that's getting a lot more real because earlier we talked about English being the language, the most popular programming language as we move forward. The third point I want to make, and then maybe I'll wrap it up, is this can impact white-collar jobs a lot more than anything else which came in the past. So traditionally, when you do productivity tools and so on and so forth, it was always aimed at the lower end of the spectrum, which was getting automated, right? So people who did repetitive jobs, people who did things which they did not have to use their brain a lot more. But this is the first time you're going to have a productivity enhancer, which will actually impact people who act more. It'll actually impact more if you are using your brain a lot more, right? That's the whole point of artificial intelligence in some sense. So that's something which you need to be very cognizant of. No pun intended, Ganesh. So I said I won't talk about cognizant. But anyway, but it is important for us to know. That's another observation. I believe it's going to be interesting. Just to give an example, generative AI will do very little to the repair guy who comes and fixes your AC or lights. Very little, but it will do a phenomenal amount of impact on jobs which requires, for example, equity research, or people who use a lot more of their brain or statistics and so on and so forth. I think the calculations which are involved in that will get a lot more impacted than mundane jobs which are traditionally meant for getting automated in some sense. And I also have a big theory around jobs will never get automated. The tasks under the jobs will get automated. We can talk about that maybe later on if we find some time. But I just want to be, conscious of the fact that we have a lot more people talking. But this is absolute the right time for us to have this conversation, so that we get a good sense of what should individuals and enterprises do, because these are very different. Today, if you see interestingly, usually the technology is absorbed by the enterprises first and then the people later. But this is one thing where you find that individuals are able to absorb and understand, and then ability to sort of get into the bandwagon pretty quickly, and enterprise is still struggling or trying to figure out what is the best way for them to really leverage this technology. So with that, let me pause here, Ganesh, and hand it over back to you.
Thanks a lot, Rajesh. And I think what you're saying is so right, because while companies are still getting their arms around what exactly is the value of Gen AI for the enterprise and its customers, I think individuals are really shooting far ahead. So it's interesting that this panel consists of Rajesh, who's flew in from Gurgaon, Rohini, who flew in from Bangalore, Nitin, who is from Mumbai, and of course Jeff. I cannot even predict where Jeff is on a different point of time, because I think he lives in one different city in Asia every day. So Jeff, just to kind of tee up this conversation with you, we had this presentation by the BCG NASSCOM report, and there we talked about the $330 billion AI opportunity, and of course, almost immeasurable impact on GDP. And we also talked about India's $17 billion opportunity in this area. So from your vantage point as BCG Asia, how do you see Gen AI playing out, not just in Asia, but worldwide? What's your view?
I was going to say we could probably do a 700-minute panel on this topic, but we'll try to keep it to our time constraints. I wanted to start with maybe two observations, right, and two classes of observation. Number one is, who is starting to take advantage of Gen AI from a company perspective? What's the profile, et cetera? And number two is, how are people actually using it, and how are companies actually using it? Where do we see value being created today? So first, in terms of adoption, I think many of our clients, we're running roughly now around 100, 150 odd Gen AI engagements around the world. And I would note that Asia Pacific has a disproportionately high proportion of those, and I'll come back to that. But if we if we look at the common characteristics, like 2023 was very much a year of very early experimentation with generative AI. And when we talk to CEOs and company leaders, 2024 is the year when they want to start seeing real impact. So I think we're seeing a transition from experimentation to impact. That's first. And then you say, well, I get a common question. Well, what types of companies are adopting this, right? So first off, actually across industries, right, we see experimentation and adoption. I think one common characteristic is places where there are large corpuses of information that need to be, I'd say, used on a regular basis by people in a company, right? And that could be a wealth management advisor. It could be an insurance broker. It could actually be a high-skilled technician. Actually, we've been doing deployments for frontline elevator technicians and also frontline wind turbine engineers. But these types of roles actually exist across industries, so we're seeing adoption across many industries. And as I said earlier, our adoption that we've seen in Asia Pacific is actually higher than in a relative basis than we've seen in North America or Europe. Why might that be? Number one, because we have one could argue a larger set of companies who are less encumbered by very long histories and an ambition to grow, but also in many of our markets across Asia, India inclusive, we increasingly have a very digital customer and digital consumer, which means we have natural data advantages, et cetera. So that's a bit on the what, right? But one common characteristic of companies is we really see the leaders adopting faster. What does that mean? When we look across corporations in the world, right, we actually segment into a couple different segments, as you might imagine. But to keep it simple, there are about 25% of companies out there that deliver outsized total shareholder return growth, that deliver over 3x EBIT growth compared to their peers, that deliver over 3x revenue growth compared to their peers. So that's 25%, right? If I look at those 25% based on surveys we ran in December of last year, 65% of them are in the process of experimenting and deploying generative AI. If I take the other 75% of companies, the ones that are not in this top quartile of performance, actually, as of December, 0% of them had actually already progressed with the generative AI deployment. So I think, first observation on the who is across industries, Asia Pacific disproportionately represented, but it is the companies that have significant ambitions and I'd say a track record of innovation and growth that are the early adopters. Now, the next important question, right, is so what are they doing with it? And if there are these leading companies that are driving adoption, they must believe in value. So what types of value are they creating, right? So let me say a few words on that as part of this opening statement. Now, we think of three modes of value creation from generative AI, and the important footnote is that it's never generative AI alone that creates that value. Typically, in most of the examples that we'll talk about today, there's AI plus generative AI plus optimization and many other technologies working together. That being said, three modes of value creation. Mode number one is what we call deploy. What is deploy? Deploy is a co-pilot that helps you record meetings and summarize the meeting notes. Deploy is respond to my email faster. Deploy is I have some editing tools that help me to write a memo faster and better. So basically, it's the everyday jobs inside of a company where there's now some better tools that help people along the way. So the nature of the job is pretty much the same. The sequence of processes is the same, but there's better tools that can drive a 20 to 30% productivity improvement throughout. And this, we believe, will be the domain of the big software companies deploying enterprise software, and you can imagine who some of those are, right? That intersects the desktop or the mobile device of workers, both in headquarters and out in the field. So that's deploy. Second is what we called reshape, and reshape is about how do I look at functions inside of my company, major functions inside of my company, and rethink how I work them end to end. Because generative AI enables me to actually run them in a fundamentally different way. So it's not just about a technology deployment, but it's actually rethinking about, using an example I showed earlier. Well, I have a wealth manager in my bank who calls up 25 different clients or potential clients every day. How can I actually reimagine their entire onboarding to training to actually the tools that they use to interact with a customer or a potential client, right? To actually reimagine what it means to be a wealth manager in a bank. So common functions we see being reshaped is very much in customer service. It's very much sometimes in frontline engineering and service. Also very frequently, as you can imagine, in marketing and other related functions. So really taking functions, rebuilding them from the bottom up end to end with what Gen AI can do, and driving sometimes 40, 50% effectiveness improvements in those functions. And last but not least is, and I'll end with this one, is what we call reinvent. And invent is actually, as a corporation, or in some cases even a government, right? I could imagine fundamentally different businesses that I want to launch that are now possible because of generative AI. And so new revenue streams, new parts of the market that I can access, but actually kind of rebuilt and new from the ground up. So anyway, those three areas, and actually if we look at companies today to close, I'd say almost everyone is starting on the process of deploy. So how do I get the standard Gen AI tools throughout my organization? We argue that will be table stakes for competitiveness in the coming years. And the big focus right now is on reshaping, reinventing. How do I reinvent my critical functions from end to end? And that's where we see the leaders moving fastest.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. And I really like that last point you made because, I remember in the good old days of business process re-engineering, we were saying exactly that look, technology has a recursive relationship with processes because tomorrow's processes can be reinvented with technology. And of course, what you said about reinvent, I think potentially one has to just completely rethink society, rethink the world, and rethink operations. And it's going to be, as you rightly said, a very fascinating journey. So with that, let me move to Nitin. And I had the privilege of being the chair of the IT strategy for the State Bank of India, which is India's largest bank, for 3 years. And Nitin and I have done many things together. And I think today, when we look at digital analytics, data, which is, I think, Nitin's pet topic, I think it's absolutely amazing what all is happening in an erstwhile very traditional bank. And I keep joking to people that the 3 times market value increase of State Bank in the last 3 years has probably a lot to do with the amount of efficiency and amount of reinvention they've done. So Nitin, give us the highlights of what's happening as a completely transformative strategy in State Bank? And of course, what is the role that you see AI and Gen AI playing with it?
Thank you, Dr. Natarajan. I think if we start at the highest level in terms of what is the distribution of generative AI as a technology across the world. I think we are again looking at a bit of a concentration risk because most of these technologies are coming out of a certain place in the globe. So I think now that we're seeing a few of these LLMs being built in India, and State Bank has also expressed that we would like to build our own LLM, but I'll talk about that later. Is probably is something that we should think about because this is likely to also change the way the overall geopolitics works. And Gen AI, because of the very nature of being transformational, the extent of being transformational in a very long time from what we've seen in the last few decades, can expectedly also create a divide between people who have the data and have the technology and people who don't have the data and therefore cannot have that technology and have to depend on somebody else. From that point of view, I think we are fortunate in India that we have a lot of digital data now, and most of it is recent, and we can actually put it to good use. I don't know how that stands for a developed market because most of the data that we see in the developed markets is actually public data. It's not personal data. In India, we have a good mix of personal and public data because of just the fact that more and more people have taken to digital. A lot of digital businesses have come around. So then comes this whole context of how can you put this data to use? Of course, there are regulations across the world. Some people are guarding it very carefully. Some people are saying that, no, we will have to stand up for privacy. We are obviously looking at DPDP getting enacted anytime, in the middle of this year. And many of those nuances around how we are going to be using data and therefore using data for Gen AI, because Gen AI will work to the extent that we want it to work based on what data we provide to Gen AI. If we start to use Gen AI like a conversational interface that OpenAI has done, it will do all the things and give the answers like the ones we shared last evening. But will it help me in my job? Will it help you in your business? Will it help a student who's, let's say, studying Sanskrit? Perhaps not. So these models will have to be trained on our data. And therefore, I think that effort, if not already begun, will have to begin right now across businesses, across governments, across all kinds of stakeholder systems. Now, within that, in the industry that I come from, which is the financial services or banking in specific, we again have this advantage of a lot of data. And State Bank being in the position that it is also has a lot of data, much more than many other of our colleagues in the industry. So we want to now bring in a nuanced view to working on technologies like Gen AI. So far, we worked on traditional AI. SBI has been working on traditional AI for maybe around 7-8 years now. In fact, we don't have any rule engines anymore. All of them have been replaced with AI models. So when we start looking at AI a lot more seriously about 3 years ago, and this is pre-Gen AI, one of the things we realized is that we need a framework for ethical and responsible AI. Because as an important stakeholder in the ecosystem and for the economy, we will have to at least put those guardrails in place where even if there is no law like DPDP, which obviously wasn't there 3 years ago, how do we protect, how do we make sure that the rights are protected, how do we do things in an ethical manner, how do we bring about the explainability for AI, and how do we also make it inclusive? Now, one of the things that can happen with this technology, while I agree with Rajesh that it is a great leveler and an equalizer, and it should be, there will always be some people who will disproportionately benefit from it versus people who will not benefit from it as much. Or maybe the benefits will flow to them over a longer period of time versus some people who will be the early beneficiaries of how they want to put the technology to use. So clearly from that point of view, the way we look at it in SBI is that one, we make it inclusive. We don't exclude any segments of our customers who should not get benefits of insights that we have on data which may relate to them or may relate to lookalike segments, and therefore whatever we need to offer, we should be able to offer to them in a very, very equitable manner. That is number one. Number two, what kind of frameworks are required to make sure that there is a governance process? Because if there is governance at the board, there is governance at the regulator, there is governance for everything pretty much that we do, and every single activity that the banking industry gets into is very tightly regulated. even regulations will have to change. So there are active discussions going on even in the regulator community that what kind of regulations are required to even oversee something like this. How do you go and fault somebody by saying that, you did this, but show me where is it mentioned in the regulations, because the person who is answering back to the regulator might just turn around and say that I didn't do it, my AI did this for me. So regulators also are going through that change, and yesterday I was at the RBI College of Agriculture Banking, and we heard from the ED who looks after supervision there, and he was talking about how much RBI itself is investing into AI, and of course now generative AI. So regulations across the world are likely to change. In those regulations, regulators will always want customer protection at the center of it, and as banks and as a responsible bank, we thought it is important for us to bring that framework of governance. And governance for us means that there are enough and more checks and controls. So we look at this whole journey of AI, and this is a view I've had personally for quite a few years, that we move from AI being assistive technology to an augmentative technology, which is where we are today, and finally autonomous. Yes, there are lots of use cases of autonomous AI also, but I don't think we are in any hurry to get there unless all of us want only driverless cars and we want only robots running our homes, but that's a different topic for another day. But Gen AI probably is somewhere in between. So it is expected to augment. We do expect it to enhance knowledge. So some of the things that we are trying to do with Gen AI now, effectively, we are looking at two tracks within the bank. One is that we will learn, because we don't profess that we know it all. Yes, we have data. We have a lot of AI models. We have a great team of data scientists. But what we're trying to do is to learn through a whole lot of experimentation. So quite a few use cases are getting developed in-house and some with our tech partners. The second track is a little more ambitious and fairly long-term, is that we should start building our own large language models, which is at least domain-specific. Because for how long will we be dependent on open source models? I'm sure Rohini may not like that, but we are looking at a situation where we can either coexist with open source models or have something of our own, which also goes through all these tests of data sovereignty, etc. And eventually we have that kind of independence with technologies like these, that we are not completely dependent on both the cryptography or the technical aspects, and even the I would say the talent which is coming from elsewhere. It is also a fact that most of the tech that's been developed across the world in AI, 40 to 50% of that has been developed by Indians working for those corporations. So there is also a great emphasis of people wanting to come back and wanting to do that in India, because just for the sheer fact that we have so much data. So I think, in summary, it's a bit of a fine balancing act right now. We are excited and optimistic, but we are also a little concerned, because we also need many other things to fall in place, including regulations, the governance structures, inclusivity, making sure that people don't actually end up getting excluded while we progress on this path. Thank you.
Thanks, Nitin. That was fascinating. And thank you for bringing out those 2 points. I think the point that we've always made is, with AI, as he rightly said, it can be assistive, ideally augmentative, which Gen AI certainly will be, and autonomous. And the fear always gets created by people worrying about autonomous machines. And I think any responsible government, society, or corporation CEO will not be looking at autonomous too early, before we know what exactly needs to be replaced. So I think that's very clear. And the second point, of course, on ethical and responsible AI, because we all know that the term now being used is hallucination. So it's very easy to blame the hallucination of an AI on something which is completely not okay to put out in the marketplace. But it's like a 4-year-old kid going to class and beating up somebody, and the teacher calls you and says, look, aren't you teaching him properly? But the responsibility, whether it's AI or it's a human being, is entirely ours. So I think that's not going to shift from the human being. So let me now move to Rohini, because I think Microsoft very much in the last 1 year has been totally on the leading edge of AI, and including, I think, what we have seen with the new collaboration with the French company, and of course the very famous partnership between Sam Altman and Satya Nadella. And the co-pilots area, in fact, when I met Rohini 5 months back at home, she was talking about co-pilots and promised to train me on using co-pilots, which Rohini you still haven't done. But that's going to completely change the way. Imagine a situation where you are actually going to work for an employer, and the employer says, look, let my AI first talk to your AI, and then we'll figure out whether you're compatible. That day is not far off, by the way. So ultimately, a co-pilot can almost be your co-pilot, guide in everything you do, everything you think about. So Rohini, tell us, what is the great Microsoft story, and how are we going to see life unfold in front of us in the future?
Okay, thank you, Ganesh. So one of the advantages of going in the end is that you get to connect a few dots and respond to a few points. And I will try not to make it a Microsoft thing. Let me put three ideas here. One is that the changing nature of work in general. The second is, why is this phase of AI different? And Rajesh talked about the fact that AI is not new. Why is this different? And third, I'll combine the two ideas as to how this is changing some of the ways work is happening, and I'll touch on the couple of, or the three layers of ways in which Jeff talked about the way AI is changing jobs, right? So one is, we all just recently went through the pandemic world, and we all saw changing nature of work. We all experienced it. We all began to see doctors online, which we would have never done in the past. We all began to order food online on our apps that we may not have done in the past. So our mental model shifted in big ways in how we work, how we function on our daily personal lives, our professional lives. We changed our paradigms. Think of this, think of that as being, if you see the dimensions of time and space. In the past, we were looking at primarily working at the same place at the same time. And we kind of began to say that, that doesn't have to be the case. We can work in different places. We can also work in some ways where we don't have to be at the same time at the same place. Now think of AI as a third dimension to how we work. And that is an important idea to think and just internalize a little bit. And I'll come to it why. I'll give you some examples. Now let me come to the second part as to why this phase of AI is different. As Rajesh rightly said, AI is not new. In fact, there are many things in AI, such as the protein folding problem, such as when Watson defeated the humans in Jeopardy. These all happened before generative AI came about. So many very famous landmarks or breakthroughs have happened in the world before generative AI. And again, generative AI is just one new technology and large language models, etc. And this is not the last. So it will keep happening. But why is it different? It's different because on a couple of different paradigms, and I'll just take two of them. One that was mentioned, I think Ganesh mentioned in the opening address, is that now you're able to talk to the computer in your own language. The computer has to understand you. You don't need to learn Fortran or C or whatever, Python, etc. You don't have to understand that. That's one big difference. And it's multimodal, meaning it can see, it can hear, it can talk, right? So that's a very, very big difference. Second difference is that, which is perhaps a little less understood, is that it's a reasoning engine. What you have in the LLM is a reasoning engine. Let me give you an example to explain what I mean by that. Let's say you have a particular job requirement. You have a job description, JD, that you have created, and you have two candidates that you need to define who will work for you, who will be a better candidate. A human being will look at the job description, look at the two resumes, and do a reasoning in the mind as to who will be a better candidate. Today, this large language model can do this for you. You give this model the job description and the two resumes. The model will tell you who's better and why. Now you can tell this model, you know what? Okay, you told me person B was better than person A, but I need this person in 2 months. The model will come back and say, oh, with this new restriction, who's the better person? With reasoning. That's what I mean by reasoning. So what you have behind in this intelligence engine is a reasoning engine. Now if you combine these two, that's where the idea of a co-pilot comes in. So co-pilot in general, the idea is that of having an intelligent agent that works with you, for you, alongside you, etc., etc. Right? Now that changes the way in which work happens. So if you think, for example, you're getting into one of the white collar jobs, you're sitting and getting into a team meeting, and I do that all the time. In the past, I used to be writing notes. Today, I don't. I look at my teams, I look at people, because the co-pilot is taking notes. And in the end, all I say to the co-pilot, please summarize this meeting for me. Tell me the action items. And it does everything. This person said this person said that, this is what happened in the meeting, these were the action items, these are the follow-throughs, everything. I can even ask it, this person so-and-so say a joke. Or where is this person going for a vacation? All that the co-pilot is able to tell you. I no longer take meeting notes. That's an example of how even an example of a work changes. Now I'll just touch on a couple of things that Jeff mentioned at the 3 orders of examples, right? So today, the example I just gave you on team meeting, think of that as a maybe assistive or something that you could have done. It's an assistive thing. Now let's go to augmentation or something that completely changes the business process or a function. Now think of the nature of a teacher in a government school who wants to create a lesson plan for a 7th grade chemistry class, right? That person neither has the time, nor the resources, nor the capability of bringing interesting experiments, interesting ideas, something that you can use from your local, environment to demonstrate, for example, third law of motion, right? That teacher can today completely change the way in which teaching can be done. In fact, that's happening today. That was one of the demos we showed to Satya. It's a foundation called Shikshana Foundation that Microsoft Research is working on to provide the teachers a intelligent agent, a co-pilot that's helping the teacher create interesting lesson plans for their students in a way that could not have been done in the before. Now, that's a way in which entire function or entire particular job gets changed. The last one is clearly the ways in which completely new lines of businesses or new revenue streams or business models change. Yes, that will also happen, and I'm seeing that happen early stages in some of the companies I work with. But yes, that will be the third way people suddenly say, you know what, I have this data, I have this know-how, can I now do something completely different for my customer base or a new customer base? And that will happen. So I'll pause with that. I think the co-pilot idea is a more general idea, and it will impact every section of society and in ways that we cannot imagine today. And I think some of the great places where it has tremendous impact is things like education, things like healthcare, things like the judiciary, where a huge, huge backlog of problems are sitting to be solved, years and years where cases don't get resolved, where a legal, a person who works on the legal documents can use co-pilots to really create their cases. There's tremendous. Healthcare, I mean, I think some of these places we will be able to solve things that we could not imagine solving in the past.
Thanks a lot, Rohini, but can't help asking you a question that if everybody has a very intelligent and increasingly intelligent co-pilot with us, won't that make us all stupid and lazy?
So I'll have to ask that. Did calculators make you less intelligent or less innovative or less...
I think so. I used to know 19 times 7 without thinking about it. Now I don't.
Yeah, but would you have done a space shuttle by just calculating on the fly?
Done. No, that's true. So I think it's which way you look at it. So that's the beauty of it. Okay, now this is your time for asking questions or anything, but remember to make it short. But before that, don't forget I did ask ChatGPT to comment on this discussion. So came up with some doomerism views. You know what a doomerism is? What is going to go wrong with the world? It's just ChatGPT's own view of killing itself. And what, of course, can be the very positive things. And what ChatGPT came up with is economic disruption, because there can be a complete change in the way economies grow or not grow. I mean, we've already seen China had a march over even the United States in AI and been investing in it very heavily. But where will that go? Ethical violation, which ChatGPT also points out. I mean, the whole era of deep fakes and deep fake videos is on us. And we have to be, especially in this election, we have to be very careful what we see, what we believe. And we have to really, I mean, that's a lot of stuff happening in TV as we speak. The third is, of course, employment displacement. Again, remember we talked about assistive, augmentative, and autonomous. So that's the potential threat. And the fourth, which I think a lot of people mentioned, including Nitin, is the potential digital divide. That will the digital have-nots or the co-pilot haves steal a march over the co-pilot have-nots. So I think that's something we have to think about. Yeah, it also points out a number of very interesting advantages. One is personalization. That is, what you see is exactly based on your reading preferences or learning preferences, and you don't have to worry about somebody's style of speaking or articulation or whatever. The second, of course, is global competitiveness, because ChatGPT genuinely believes that societies and companies which adopt Gen AI can potentially become much more competitive globally. And obviously that again means the people who don't might be left behind. And finally, it talks about something that Dr. Mashelkar mentioned, I mean, his favorite theme of science, technology, and innovation, and talks about really fueling substantial innovation. So innovation, research for individuals, companies, and countries which really embrace it is really what ChatGPT says can be the biggest advantage of using or adopting Gen AI. So with that, over to you. I know my friend Ajit Ranade has his first question. So yes, Ajit, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, and really fascinating conversation. So my question is perhaps to Dr. Rohini about, in economics we have a law which says, it's called Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good money. So if you have counterfeit currency circulating, people tend to kind of get rid of it. So eventually the bad money just keeps circulating, and the good money, the genuine money, that's the Gresham's law. So in the context of AI, this snowballing effect, the learning models are going to learn on stuff which after some time AI itself is going to generate. A lot of the op-eds are being written by AI. The co-pilot is going to talk about summarizing. So AI generated stuff is the stuff which is going to be the input for learning models. So that potentially can have a snowballing effect that we are just, Gresham's law. Is that a risk, big risk?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and you're right. As the lot of content starts to become AI generated. Now the question is that do next generation of AI follow the same route as the previous generations in the sense of learning from all of internet? I'm seeing that change. So, for example, some of the work that's happening now is actually realizing that you really don't need such large language models, because the ability to give it the right kind of data. In fact, there is a paper recently which says textbooks is all you need. The original paper, the original work came out from something called attention is all you need. It's a play on that word. But the idea is that if you are able to give a learning model very well curated and good content that you will give to a child to learn from, then actually the model doesn't have to be that big. So what I'm saying, the way I'm responding is that one innovation started by learning everything from the internet. That's only one level. As things are changing and people are realizing that what other innovations, what issues, bias is one thing you didn't mention. And again, as you rightly said, it's that snowball effect. Many other reasons. There are work happening in terms of ensuring that you actually have language models which are getting trained on good data, on relevant, good, solid textbook-like data. That's one. Second point is that, while we are all talking ChatGPT, etc., which I absolutely love, but I think the important thing, and Nitin also brought up, is that you will see, and we are seeing, large language models being developed in multiple countries, including in India, which are trained on that country's context. I got a very interesting example recently that, let's say you ask ChatGPT, or a 5-year-old asks ChatGPT, what should I eat for a healthy diet? That person, the response should be in the context of that child. If the child is sitting in a small town in Karnataka, it should talk about ragi mudde and it should talk about the diet that person is used to, right? Not something that is eaten in the West. Point I'm saying is context element, some of that is happening. And just like OpenAI, just like Mistral, just like some Hugging Face, all these models are on Microsoft Cloud. Indian models will also get on Microsoft Cloud. That's the nature of the game, because it is going to become a model as a service. The last point is, today when we are asking ChatGPT, we are asking ChatGPT to tell what it knows. Actually, that is not the dominant way in which you use these things. The dominant way you use these things is by telling it, I want to use your reasoning capability, but I want to tell you, this is my data, this is my context. So use my context, reason on it, and then tell me the answer. So you actually ground it. It's called grounding. You ground it on your context, your data, so that you are getting something that's relevant to you. It's a larger question. Happy to take it later.
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you. I think we should all look for grounded AIs. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Bode. If you can just also say your name, it'll be useful.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh. My name is Sushil Borde, and I'm a member at Pune International Center. Just picking on Rohini ji, your point on AI and education. And this question possibly is for all four of you being leaders of this industry. What is happening in terms of integrating AI in education in India? And the reason why I'm asking you just this morning, Ganesh, you mentioned about MIT's technology review. Eric Schmidt has recently written an article in that where he talks about how AI is going to change the way science is being done or will be done. And of course, there are examples of how drug discovery is going to get accelerated and all of that. We know that, and it's fascinating. My daughter's in med school, and she was sitting next to me while I was reading that. And I asked her, are you studying AI? And she said, no, I know what is AI, but it's not in my curriculum. And it's a 5-year curriculum. She's in the first year. And I don't think she has a view on AI getting integrated in her 5th year even, right? So how is AI changing, for example, just to stay with this example, just medicine? And if it is not being taught to the med school students, then it is only about, yes, you will be interacting with AI, but you will not know how it gets integrated.
So in a sense, what you're
medical
saying is,
science.
how is AI going to transform the way kids get educated? So Nitin, you want to comment on
And
that?
more importantly, what is being done,
Yeah.
Ganesh, in India to very rapidly integrate AI as part of the curriculum.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're going. So, I'm picking on Nitin because his daughter was in Pune just a couple of months back, and she was actually doing a full project, and she's a school kid, on AI, how it transformed the social sector, and how we in what we do call lighthouse communities can actually predict what can happen to the kid as they come through programs like this. What's your view on this, Nitin, generally?
No, I think it's a very good observation. But even before AI gets into the curriculum, AI doesn't need to get into the curriculum. AI is an assistive tool. But before that, I think what has also happened is that most of the learning has now moved to experiential learning. And specifically in the context of medicine, I came across this company almost 7-8 years ago, which had developed 3D models on iPads for medical students, because they said, what do you understand with a two-dimensional image of a skeleton in a book versus what you can see, rotate and see it from different viewpoints, and now it's pretty common. So I think as the learning teaching techniques are changing, the ability to personalize that is far better. But I would imagine that 1 year ago or 1.5 years ago, everybody should have known coding, at least in that generation, is what all of us would believe, that I wish I knew coding. And all of us believe that all children should learn coding. But now that coding itself is becoming low code and no code, why do you even need to learn coding? You can just give your prompts in English. So I don't think AI needs to come into the curriculum per se. AI needs to come in a more applied manner, that if I have access to something, can I use it for better learning outcomes? If I'm an educator, can I use it for better teaching outcomes? So my daughter, for example, developed a model, which detects, which works on speech recognition to detect autism. Now that is something, at least her view was that, a lot of unprivileged families don't even understand that their children are autistic, for a very long time. And by the time the therapy actually starts, it's too late. So can you do that for a 2-year-old? Can you do that for a 3-year-old through basic speech pattern recognition? It may not be something extremely innovative, but I think it was a relevant project to look at. So things like those, which may not necessarily be a part of curriculum, even as an area of interest, at least we see a lot of kids now taking to that. But I think education per se will probably take a little more time before it changes.
You want this?
No, I just want to add to what Nitin just said. I mean, when you look at AI for education, there are multiple dimensions to that. One is, of course, what get taught in the curriculum. But let's also not forget that the biggest impact, in my mind at least, for AI will have on education is the hyper-personalization, and which again, Nitin, you mentioned it. It's traditionally in a classroom, the teacher is actually teaching the average student. The really brilliant student get bored with the content, and the really dumb student really gets it doesn't get it at all. But the idea would be, once you really have AI pervasive, then you could technically have an education system where you are being taught to the level you are at, in some sense. So some level of hyper personalization in terms of how can you really learn, that becomes the key. And then the most important thing for the student will be learnability and how do you really pivot from one to the other, not necessarily studying. There's no point in going and teaching somebody who's in the second grade or third grade about generative AI today, because for sure, in the next 3 years, we will not talk about generative AI. We'll be talking about something else. So how do you make sure that you understand the general concepts of how you can pivot from one technology to the other, or from understanding or how rapidly you could learn with this whole notion of hyper-personalization, which is clearly relating it to how you learn and what can be taught to you?
Great. I think we have 3 questions in that cluster. So can you ask your question and pass it back?
Sure.
And you can pass it to Uma. Yeah. Go ahead.
So my name is Girish, and my specific question is.
Girish, hold it closer to your.
Yeah. My name is Girish, and my question is to Rajesh. What's the future of software services business? Because coding is gone, and that's prominently what software services guys do. And my second question is for Jeff. Where do you see business models changing because of generative AI? Because, mobile changed the way we did business, computers did that. Do we see generative AI doing that as well? So there's 2 questions for me. Thank you.
Okay, so let me start with Jeff. Jeff, the question was, how does business models completely get transformed by generative AI? So any examples you'd like to share from BCG's work?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very early days. Right, and I think one of the interesting analogies going way, way back in history that I've heard that I will repeat, which is, I forget in what year the car was invented, but we actually had to, then after that, you had to have the invention of the assembly line manufacturing process before cars transformed society, right? So I think we've got, it's like, if the progress in Gen AI is like the invention of the automobile, we still haven't yet invented, I think, some of the new things. But to give some examples of where I see very interesting progress, right? I think number one, we had a little bit of talk about medicine before. I think many of the leading pharmaceutical companies in the world believe that generative AI will transform the drug discovery process, and I actually are actively in the process of investing in capabilities to leverage generative AI technologies to transform the drug discovery process. So I think that's certainly one area, and that's what I would expect to see significant disruptions in the value chain there. I think second, and this is relevant, in India and many of the markets that I work in, is customer service will be significantly transformed, right? We have not yet, I think we are not at the stage where one should be ready or should be comfortable to make a chatbot or a generative AI system your interface to the customer. But the ability to actually make a customer service call center agent 10x more productive, right, in terms of the resolution rate, et cetera, is actually possible. So any industry that has significant customer service components, I think we see being very likely transformed. And I'll give you one last non-obvious one, right, because we talk a lot about, chatbots, customer service, et cetera. There are many very, very complex design processes that exist in the back ends of all of our technology. Just think about the layout of a printed circuit board, for example. It usually is very high-skilled humans who have to figure out how to lay out a PCB. Actually, there is very promising views that the whole process of actually how we design, especially some of the electronics components and things that still have an analog portion to them that go in all of our devices, could be radically transformed. So just a few examples there, and I think you could, to some extent, imagine, right, if those pieces of the puzzle were transformed, how some of those industries could be very much disrupted.
Thanks, Jeff. So, Rajesh, about software services, with 10 years later, with NASCOM become NICOM, it's no longer software services, but AI comes.
That's something we may have to think through. But to Girish's question, listen, I think when you look at today in the broader software services, and this is the question I get asked all the time. First of all, there's 2 different buckets broadly when you look at some of these workforce, right? There's people who work on process-related industry, which traditionally we used to call them BPO, but of course it's evolved quite a bit in terms of what we do. Some of that runs a risk of getting probably replaced with an AI engine pretty quickly. But when you go back, that as well as on the software services, in programming and design analysts and so on and so forth, my view is that, one, I think people who do not use AI might run the risk of getting replaced by people who use AI, right? Not by AI. So I never think that humans are going to get replaced with AI. So the way to think about it is that the humans who do not use AI might get replaced with people who use AI in some sense. Also, as I think I kind of mentioned it when I was saying in the beginning, the jobs themselves are unlikely to get replaced. What is likely to get replaced are the tasks under a job. So let's think of a job. It's not just one task in a job, right? So you probably can map about maybe 10 or 5 or 10 or 25. So you will find that when you go back into those tasks, some of them will get potentially actually get done a lot better with a higher level of productivity. And those are the ones which are getting replaced with maybe an AI engine or a productivity tool and so on and so forth. So if you look at it that way, if you are a programmer, instead of all day sitting and coding, you might now have coding done by the co-pilot or the equivalent of, not just Microsoft, right? I mean, there could be others who could probably replace that, but it will be other things that you did in terms of solving a problem, understanding what is the most impactful algorithm that you could build. All of that is still something which will be done by a human being. But so it's about augmenting its humans and AI as opposed to humans versus AI in some sense.
Good. I think we have 3 more questions to be. So maybe we can get all the questions together. And since I'm a good soldier of Gautam Bambawale, I'll make sure we finish on time, Gautam. Don't worry. So Uma, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Uma. Rajesh, you mentioned a little while ago that white-collar jobs are the ones which are going to be impacted most with generative AI. We already have some Chinese companies like NetDragon, Websoft, which has appointed AI agent as its CEO, and I think it's called some Tang Yu. So my question to you is whether you think this will happen in India and jobs of the CEOs like yourself will get replaced with generative AI agent very soon.
Sir, go ahead.
Thanks for a wonderful session. My name is Harshal Chitale. I'm an economist who's worked closely with governments. So my question, we have the private sector here as well as someone from the public sector, is on data and the fear that you might sort of start to restrict access or concentrate the benefits from sort of the next generations of AI technologies. So my question is, where are you comfortable right now where we are in our journey on data governance, data sharing with public agencies, given that data availability can lead to such sort of large progresses in research and innovation?
Okay. Pradeep? Can you get a mic here, please?
My name is Pradeep Bhargav.
Hold it closer.
Yeah. I grew up in brick and mortar industry and I've been off IT, but my question is, just in this 70-minute session, we had Rajesh saying it's an equalizer, Nitin said it's a divider in your own ways. You said co-pilot and Ganesh said, no, you couldn't be the pilot. So I'm saying with this phenomenal diversity of views, it's important that we respect and acknowledge regulator as an intervening phase. Industry and technologies don't like regulators. But it's time here, unless regulator will generate a regulation using AI, well, that's also a possibility in lighter vein. But on a serious note, I think it's important at this stage in life, we technologists and industry engage with regulators so that a sensible thing comes. Otherwise, the flux will go up in the geo-economic challenges that we face. It's going to be a very dynamite, so engage. That's my submission.
Okay, so let me get quick closing comments and answers from our 4 panelists. Let me start with Jeff. I think the question... Sorry?
Can I ask a question? Small question.
I'll come back to you. Okay. The question, Jeff, was regulation. I mean, you, in your vantage point all over Asia, including, of course, China. So do you think regulators will over-regulate? Will they come in the way of data access? Is it good for data privacy? I think both these last 2 questions in that context. So what is your view?
Yeah, it's so. No, I mean, that's not a short answer, but I'll make it a short answer. The regulatory approach is very heterogeneous in different regimes around the world, right? And so, some places are focused on outcomes, some places are focused on inputs, et cetera. So I think it's actually, really early to say exactly how it's going to play out. I think that we can safely assume, like most technological advances, sort of the regulatory regime needs to catch up with how fast the technology moves. And I think we're seeing that play out, number one, right? And number two, and I would want to relate back to a point of another panelist before, which is the ability of generative AI to do harm will probably move faster than the ability of regulation to prevent that harm. And that is why, many companies, and probably many companies in the room, are building responsible AI capabilities such that they can make sure that the way they are deploying this technology sort of meets, I'd say, their values and their standards, because just being regulatorily compliant is maybe necessary but not sufficient in this very dynamic setting.
What's your view, Nitin? I mean, in one of the most regulated sectors in this country, do you think the regulator will play a role in dampening the enthusiasm around AI, or will they kind of make sure that it's done properly?
No, I don't think we expect them to play spoil sport. But since the overall business nuances are changing, and it's not just what you regulate, the regulated entity is going to change. The regulated entity deals with businesses and consumers. They themselves are changing. So if it is, I think the point was made by Rajesh in his opening remarks that this is the first time that the users are pushing it up, or you, I think, made that point, up to the enterprise level rather than the top-down approach that we've always seen. So regulators, I think, are fairly clued on. Now, the only thing we can argue is that how timely is it going to be? The point that whether it comes, what Jeff said, whether it comes after the harm is done or before the harm is done. And in our industry, there are 4 financial services regulators. So how do we also make sure that all of them are thinking the same thing? And I'm sure they are talking to each other before they form a view. But from what we hear, I think both the government and the regulators are seriously thinking on the lines of bringing out regulations.
So now to that interesting question, Rajesh. So will we need Rajesh Nambiar anymore, or will your AI suffice?
You may not need Rajesh Nambiar anymore, but that's a different topic altogether. But I think this absolutely craziest idea, I would say, to have executives replaced by AI and so on and so forth, right? I think time will tell that if somebody has to perform the role of a CEO of a company, they do about 100 different things in their life. And again, I go back to the task versus job argument. There are lots of tasks which the CEO could perform today can certainly be used with an assistant, AI assistant. We talked about Copilot. We talked about people who could summarize meetings for you, who could get you data, in 2 seconds as opposed to 20 days of financial reporting and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things which a CEO can leverage AI and then be a better CEO. But CEO getting replaced with an AI, I don't see that in my lifetime.
Rohini, last word.
Hello. Yeah, I think, so I think the idea of the earlier point Rajesh mentioned about a CEO will use AI and become a better CEO. Perhaps more time for people, perhaps more time for things which are required, that creativity and empathy and being able to connect, see the trends that you cannot see otherwise. The last point I would just say, I think the point that Jeff made is there are organizations who have not been waiting for regulations. I think responsible AI, the whole process and program started in Microsoft in 2016. So from principles to processes to governance to standards to working with partners, we are now 7 or 8 years into the journey. And in fact, if I would say that because of that foundation getting laid for many years is why we were able to innovate at the speed at which we could innovate in 2023 in terms of bringing AI into every single product. It was that foundation to allow AI safety, content moderation. There's a whole suite. I don't want to go into it, but I think companies which have those foundations laid out will do better. Who understand what it means, how to leverage this technology for innovation, for productivity, all the discussions we've been having. The regulators will come in and they should learn, and that's something we are also, I've been working with NASSCOM on NASSCOM's generative AI toolkits, with Niti Aayog on multiple things for many, many years now. They'll have to learn and they'll have to understand the risk and ability to intervene at the right place. But I don't think a lot of leaders in this space are waiting for regulation.
What an exciting panel, ladies and gentlemen. I think it was a great start to the second day of AED this year. Hello. And I think Pradeep mentioned it. What you really see is a lot of unity in thinking, including from ChatGPT, that yes, there is a revolution in the making. As Rajesh rightly said right at the beginning, it's not going to happen as soon as you think, but it will happen in many fundamental ways beyond what we're imagining today. So it's good to be prepared, good to be the haves and not the have-nots. So thank you very much. Thank you for a wonderful panel, and thank you for your questions. I know there's a lot of unanswered questions. Please hold on. There is a break coming up soon, and you can ask it then. We just don't have time. I'm sorry. Okay. Why don't you ask one-to-one?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. Fantastic panel. Can I ask Ambassador Bambavale to come up and just give a small token of appreciation to each? And yes, Jeff will send you a digital one. And to Ganesh. Let's get a photograph. While we're doing a photograph, I will just read you out a little poem from ChatGPT in honor of this session. In the realm where AI whispers abide, Chair Ganesh with wisdom as our guide, Rajesh Nambiar unveils the dawn's hue, technological leaps, a future anew. Jeff Waters with insights profound sees Gen AI's growth the world around. Nitin Chugh with cautionary might, navigating geopolitics in AI's light. Rohini's vision, a co-pilot's grace, transforming tasks in every space, from mundane chores to innovation's quest, AI's evolution, humanity's best. As we stand at the brink of this digital tide, a symphony of voices on AI we ride, with questions abound and visions clear. Okay.